My second son called me at midnight. He works for the FBI. His voice was a harsh whisper. Dad, get out of your bed right now. Hide in the attic immediately. Turn your phone on silent. Lock the trap door and do not make a sound. I whispered back that he was scaring me. He practically growled through the receiver. Just do it. Do not let Trent know you are awake. I obeyed. Minutes later, looking through a crack in the attic floorboards down into my bedroom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Before I tell you how a 73-year-old man had to outsmart his own family to stay alive, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed is the quickest way to ruin a family. My name is Desmond Holloway. I spent 40 years turning dust and concrete into a commercial real estate empire here in Atlanta. I survived the tough times. I built my fortune with calloused hands and a quiet mouth. I never flaunted my wealth. I drove a modest truck, wore plain clothes, and kept my business strictly to myself. But nothing prepared me for the betrayal brewing under my own roof. 3 months ago, my daughter Chloe and her husband Trent convinced me to move into their sprawling suburban mansion. Trent is a white man who calls himself a wealth manager for the elite. He wears custom Italian suits, flashes $1 million smile, and always speaks with a sickeningly sweet tone. He told Chloe my health was failing and that I needed family around me. I thought it was genuine care. I thought he was a good husband to my daughter. I was a fool. Lying on my stomach in the pitch-black attic, the fiberglass insulation scratching my arms, I held my breath. The crack in the oak floorboards gave me a perfect view of my own bedroom directly below. The door slowly pushed open. It was not Chloe coming to check on her old man. It was Trent. But he was not alone. Beside him stood a man I had never seen before, wearing a wrinkled white lab coat over dark street clothes. They crept toward my empty bed. Trent was holding something that caught the dim hallway light, a syringe filled with a clear liquid. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. I pressed my eye closer to the floorboard, too terrified to even blink. "Where is the old man?" the fake doctor hissed. His voice was shaking. Trent cursed under his breath, aggressively ripping the heavy blankets back. He should be completely out. I made sure he drank his evening tea. The stranger looked around the room, sweating profusely. If he is walking around, this is too risky. We need him asleep so I can find the vein. If he struggles, it leaves bruises. Trent gripped the syringe tightly, his handsome face twisted into something ugly, desperate, and entirely evil. "Do not panic," Trent snapped. "We find him, we inject him, and we put him back in bed. Tomorrow morning, the paramedics will just see a 73-year-old black man who had a massive, tragic heart attack in his sleep. His heart is already failing anyway." That phrase hit me like a freight train. His heart is already failing anyway. Suddenly, the thick fog in my brain lifted. For the past 3 months, Trent had been bringing me my morning coffee, along with a handful of expensive imported vitamins. He told Chloe they were organic supplements to boost my energy and keep my blood pressure in check. He insisted I take them right in front of him every single day. But lately, I had been feeling dizzy. My chest felt heavy and tight. I could barely walk up the stairs without losing my breath. I thought it was just old age catching up with me. Now, staring through the floorboards at the syringe in his hand, the horrific truth dawned on me. He was not giving me vitamins. He was systematically poisoning me. He was feeding me drugs to weaken my heart, softening me up for this exact night. He was manufacturing my death piece by piece right in front of my daughter. "We have to do this tonight." Trent continued pacing the floor below me like a caged animal. "The new will is already notarized. I paid Paul $20,000 to get those signatures perfectly forged. The moment the old man is pronounced dead, his $15 million trust defaults to Chloe. And since I secretly had her sign that sweeping power of attorney last month, the money defaults to me. If he lives another week, he might contact his own lawyers. I cannot let that happen." The fake doctor wiped sweat from his forehead. What if he called someone? What if he knew we were coming? Trent let out a dark, mocking laugh. Who's he going to call? Chloe is drugged on sleeping pills in the master bedroom, dead to the world. And his other son, Malik, is busy playing federal agent on the other side of the country. The old man has no one. He is trapped in this house with us. Let us check the downstairs guest rooms and the kitchen. He cannot get far with his weak heart. They walked out of my bedroom and the door clicked shut. I lay there in the dark, the dust suffocating me, but I was no longer afraid. The terror had evaporated, entirely replaced by a cold, calculating rage. Trent thought I was just a senile, weak old man. He thought my wealth was a prize waiting to be claimed by a younger, smarter predator. He forgot that a man does not survive the brutal streets of Atlanta, outsmart ruthless corporate sharks, and build an empire from nothing by being weak. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up my face with a faint blue glow. A text message from my son Malik had just come through. It read, "Dad, they are hunting you." I intercepted a wiretap on the guy Trent hired. "I am 10 minutes away with a tactical team. Do not make a sound. I will get you out from the roof." I typed back a single word, "Hurry." I had to escape this house tonight. I could not confront Trent now, not when he was holding a lethal injection and a loaded gun of desperation. But I knew exactly what I was going to do. Because tomorrow Trent was not going to find a dead father-in-law in his guest room. He was going to find a ghost who would stop at absolutely nothing to tear his miserable, arrogant life apart, dollar by dollar, piece by piece. The silent adjustment had just begun. Through the narrow slit in the oak floorboards, I watched Trent step out of my bedroom and into the dimly lit hallway. The fake doctor was trailing behind him, wiping nervous sweat from his neck, but my son-in-law was completely cold. Trent reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored blazer and pulled out a matte black pistol. He smoothly screwed a long cylindrical silencer onto the barrel. My stomach dropped. The lethal injection was his primary plan to make my death look completely natural. The gun was his backup plan. He was not taking any chances tonight. If he found me awake and wandering the house, he would simply shoot me, dump my body in a ditch somewhere, and tell my daughter that her poor, confused father had wandered off into a bad neighborhood and got himself mugged. I pressed my trembling hand against my chest, desperately trying to quiet the pounding of my weakened heart. The toxic drugs Trent had been secretly feeding me for 3 months made every single heartbeat feel like a heavy sledgehammer striking against my ribs. I had to remain absolutely silent. A single creak of the old wooden joists beneath my weight would be my immediate death sentence. I could hear them checking the guest bathroom. I heard the sliding closet doors being ripped open. Then the heavy, suffocating silence of the house was broken by the sound of Trent moving toward the hallway directly beneath my position. He was heading straight for the pull-down staircase that led to the attic. "He thinks I am hiding," Trent whispered to his accomplice, his voice dripping with venom. "The old man is losing his mind. He has been paranoid all week. You go check the basement and the garage. I will check the attic." The mechanical groan of the attic staircase springing open echoed through the dark, dusty space around me. He was coming up. I could see the bright white beam of his tactical flashlight sweeping across the lower steps, cutting through the darkness. I had no weapons. I had no way to fight back against a young, desperate man armed with a silenced gun. I was a 73-year-old man whose body was failing him. I closed my eyes tightly, inhaled the dusty air, and prayed to God that my son Malik would make it in time. Just as Trent took his first heavy step up the wooden ladder, a faint scratching sound came from the roof directly above my head. It was barely louder than a whisper of wind against the shingles. The heavy slatted metal vent at the gable end of the attic was suddenly and silently removed from the outside. A shadow slipped through the narrow opening. It was a man dressed in full tactical black gear, wearing night vision goggles. He moved with the terrifying, silent grace of an apex predator. Behind him came another agent, and then, illuminated by the faint moonlight pouring through the open vent, I saw the face of my youngest son, Malik. Malik did not say a single word. He looked at me and placed a gloved finger over his lips. His eyes were cold, professional, and filled with a burning fury that he was keeping tightly leashed. He signaled to the tactical agent beside him. The agent reached my side in 2 silent strides. He carefully hooked a heavy-duty climbing harness under my arms and secured it tight. Below us, Trent was halfway up the stairs. His flashlight beam swept across the dusty cardboard boxes just 10 feet away from where I was lying flat on my stomach. The floorboards creaked under his approaching weight. Malik grabbed my arm and hoisted me up. For an old man with a medically weakened heart, being pulled into the freezing night air was excruciating, but the pure adrenaline pumping through my veins masked the physical pain. The tactical team pulled me through the narrow roof vent just as Trent reached the top of the stairs. I dangled on the edge of the sloping roof, looking down into the attic one last time through the vent. Trent kicked the attic door wide open, sweeping his flashlight and his silenced gun across the empty space. He found nothing but dust motes dancing in the light. He cursed loudly, violently, kicking a box of old winter coats. We were literally seconds away from a bullet to the head. On the cold, slippery shingles of the roof, Malik held me tight. He pressed his mouth close to my ear to mask his voice from the wind. "Dad, you are safe now," he whispered. "But we are not arresting him tonight." I looked at my son, completely confused and suddenly very angry. I wanted Trent in handcuffs immediately. I wanted to see him dragged out of my daughter's house and thrown into a federal cell to rot. But Malik shook his head, a dark, calculating smile spreading across his face. "If we arrest him right now," Malik explained softly over the howling wind, "he only gets charged with attempted assault or a state-level fraud charge regarding the forged will. With his expensive lawyers and his clean record, he might be out on bail by tomorrow afternoon. He could try to hurt Chloe. We cannot allow that. We need severe federal charges. We need him to commit wire fraud across international lines, and we need him to do it with his own fingerprints on the keyboard. He wants everyone to think you are a confused, senile old man who cannot take care of himself. So we are going to give him exactly what he wants." Malik tapped his earpiece and gave a silent hand signal to another agent who was positioned down on the ground level, hidden in the shadows of the backyard. Down below, the tactical agent quietly approached my first-floor bedroom window. With specialized tools, he silently pried the window open from the outside. He pushed it wide open, letting the cold night wind blow the heavy curtains around the room. He intentionally knocked over a glass of water on my bedside table, making it look like a clumsy accident. Finally, he took one of my old, worn-out slippers that he had grabbed from the room and left it lying in the dirt of the flower bed just outside the window. It was an absolute masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Trent was already spending his days trying to build a false narrative that I was suffering from severe dementia. When he went back downstairs empty-handed and found that open window, he would never think he had been outsmarted by an elite team from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His massive, arrogant ego would never allow him to consider that possibility. Instead, his ego would lead him to the exact conclusion we wanted him to make. He would fully believe that his senile father-in-law had simply woken up in a state of extreme confusion, panicked, climbed out the bedroom window, and wandered off into the cold, dark streets of Atlanta wearing only pajamas and one slipper. It would perfectly justify his entire twisted narrative. Malik strapped me to a secure rappelling line, and we began our silent descent down the back side of the massive suburban house, disappearing completely into the thick line of oak trees bordering the dark property. As we walked toward the unmarked black tactical vans waiting in the shadows of the next street over, I looked back at the house. My daughter Chloe was sleeping in the master bedroom, completely unaware that she was married to a ruthless monster who was willing to murder her father for a trust fund. It broke my heart to leave her in that house, but Malik assured me that 2 undercover agents would be watching the property all night to ensure she was safe. My chest ached terribly, and my legs were trembling from the exertion, but my mind was sharper and clearer than it had been in years. Trent wanted to play a dangerous game of deception and greed. He truly thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he could easily steal the massive commercial empire I built with my own blood and sweat and throw me away like a piece of garbage. But as the heavy steel doors of the FBI van slid shut, enclosing me in the safe, glowing interior of the mobile command center, I realized something deeply satisfying. Trent had just signed his own definitive death warrant. The predator thought he was hunting a helpless, sick, old sheep. He did not realize he had just walked willingly into the jaws of a lion. And tomorrow I was going to let my arrogant son-in-law dig his own grave so deep he would never see the sunlight again. The unmarked black van descended deep into the subterranean parking garage of a federal building in downtown Atlanta. The heavy steel doors rolled shut behind us, cutting off the sounds of the city. Inside the safe house, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. The sterile, windowless room was a stark contrast to the sprawling, suffocating mansion I had just escaped. My chest was still heaving, the toxic drugs Trent had been feeding me fighting against the pure adrenaline pumping through my veins. Malik handed me a bottle of water and a small white pill. He told me it was a real beta blocker prescribed by an FBI medical officer, not the poison my son-in-law had been slipping into my morning tea. I swallowed it gratefully, feeling the erratic, terrifying thumping in my chest slowly begin to steady. We sat across from each other at a cold metal table in the center of the room. Malik did not waste any time with comforting words. He knew I did not want pity. I wanted answers. He opened a heavy, ruggedized laptop, the screen glowing brightly and illuminating his stern, focused face. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls and accessing highly secure financial portals. He told me he had been tracking Trent and his digital footprint for weeks. Trent thought he was a mastermind, hiding his tracks behind encrypted servers and dummy corporations. But Malik assured me that greed always leaves a trail, and Trent was the greediest man he had ever investigated. The banking dashboard loaded on the screen. It was the portal to my primary retirement account. This was the account that held the liquid cash I had set aside years ago, the initial millions I made after selling my first major commercial block in the city. I leaned forward, squinting at the numbers on the screen. My stomach plummeted, and a wave of pure nausea washed over me. The balance, which should have read comfortably over $2 million, showed a pathetic string of digits. $412. $2 million. Gone. Evaporated into thin air. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the violation. That was not just money. That was 40 years of breathing in drywall dust. That was decades of negotiating with cutthroat contractors, fighting for respect in boardrooms that did not want a black man at the table, and working through the nights when my late wife Beatrice was at home putting Chloe and Malik to bed. Trent had wiped it out without breaking a sweat. I asked my son how this was possible. My voice came out as a dangerous, quiet rasp. Malik pulled up a digitized document on the screen. It was a power of attorney form, a document granting Trent full, unrestricted access to my liquid assets. At the bottom of the page was my signature, except it was not mine. I looked closer at the loops and angles. It was a flawless, masterful forgery. Trent had not just stolen my money, he had stolen my identity. Malik pointed to the outgoing transfer logs flashing in red across the screen. He told me that Trent was not a real wealth manager for the elite. He was a con artist who had gotten himself in way over his head. Trent had leveraged millions of dollars in bad investments for some very dangerous people. When the real estate market shifted, he was left holding the bag. He owed $2 million to a private equity firm backed by offshore shadow money. They were going to ruin his reputation, take his firm, or worse, they were going to put him in the ground. So Trent stole his father-in-law retirement fund to pay off his illicit debts and save his own skin. The cold realization washed over me instantly, followed by a profound confusion. I looked at Malik and asked the obvious question. If Trent already paid his debt with my $2 million, why does he want me dead tonight? Why the fake doctor and the lethal injection? Malik looked at me, his eyes darkening with a mixture of professional detachment and deep personal anger. Because the $2 million only covered his immediate survival, Malik explained. Trent has built a lifestyle made entirely of cards. He owes another $1 million in personal loans. His firm is secretly bankrupt, and he has tasted your wealth. He knows about the $15 million commercial real estate trust fund. The trust fund. The empire I built and locked away to ensure that Chloe and Malik and their future children would never have to struggle the way I did. The trust was ironclad, protected by layers of legal security. The only way those funds could ever be dispersed was upon my death. The pieces of the horrific puzzle finally snapped into place. Trent brought me into his home under the guise of family care, not to comfort me in my old age, but to keep me close while he systematically poisoned my heart. He planned to forge a new will, murder me in my sleep, and inherit the entire $15 million trust through my daughter, Chloe. He was going to use my own daughter as a Trojan horse to steal my life's work. I stood up, the metal chair scraping violently against the concrete floor. I slammed my hands onto the table. The rage inside me was no longer a cold block of ice, it was a raging inferno. I told Malik I wanted Trent arrested right now. I demanded he send his tactical team back to that suburban mansion, kick the custom mahogany doors down, drag Trent out of his bed, and throw him in a federal cell. He tried to murder me with a syringe. I practically shouted. He is sleeping next to your sister right now. I will not let that monster breathe free air for another minute. Malik did not flinch. He stood up and met my furious gaze, holding his ground with the unyielding calm of a seasoned federal agent. He told me to listen to him very carefully. If he arrested Trent tonight, what did they actually have? A forged state document and an attempted assault charge that Trent and his expensive defense lawyers would drag through the local courts for years. Trent would claim the doctor was a rogue actor. He would post bail by tomorrow afternoon. He would drain whatever was left of Chloe's personal accounts and he would disappear. Or worse, he would manipulate Chloe into thinking her own father and brother were the villains trying to destroy her happy marriage. Malik stepped closer, his voice dropping to a deadly, calculated whisper. Arresting him for the forged signature is state-level fraud, Dad. It is a slap on the wrist for a white-collar criminal like Trent. But if we let him believe he won, if we let him execute his plan to transfer that $15 million into an offshore shell account in the Cayman Islands, the exact moment his finger hits the enter button on his keyboard, he commits federal wire fraud across international lines. That is no longer a local issue. That is federal jurisdiction. That is not a 5-year sentence with early parole. That is 30 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with absolutely no way out. I stared at my son, the silence of the safe house pressing down on us. He was asking me to do the most terrifying thing a man could do. He was asking me to walk back into the lion den. You want me to go back there, I said, the gravity of the plan settling heavy on my shoulders. You want me to let him think his plan is working perfectly. Malik nodded slowly, his eyes locked onto mine. I need you to play the part, Dad. Be the sick, senile old man he thinks you are. Let him push the forged paperwork in front of you. Let him think you are broken. My cyber division will be monitoring every single digital move he makes on his network, and I will have undercover agents surrounding the house. But we need him to initiate the massive transfer himself. We need him to pull his own trigger. I thought about Trent. I thought about the sheer arrogance on his face as he held that syringe over my empty bed, treating my life like it was nothing more than an accounting error to be erased. He truly believed he could erase a lifetime of my hard work, manipulate my daughter, and walk away a multimillionaire. He thought my silence was weakness. A cold, absolute resolve settled deep in my chest. I looked at my son and nodded. If Trent wants to play games with a dying old man, I will give him the performance of a lifetime. Let us set the trap. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser cut through the thick morning fog as we pulled into the long circular driveway of my daughter's suburban mansion. I sat in the back of the cruiser wearing only my thin pajamas and a single worn-out slipper. My bones ached from the cold, but my mind was entirely focused. The man sitting in the driver's seat was not a local beat cop. He was an undercover federal agent assigned to Malik's task force. He looked at me through the rearview mirror and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was time to put on the performance of my life. The heavy oak front door of the mansion swung open before the cruiser even came to a complete stop. My daughter Chloe ran out onto the damp driveway. She was barefoot, wearing a silk robe, her face pale and streaked with tears. Behind her came Trent. He was already dressed in crisp designer slacks and a perfectly pressed button-down shirt, looking every bit the concerned son-in-law. His performance was sickeningly flawless. "Oh my God, Dad!" Chloe screamed, throwing open the door of the police cruiser and wrapping her arms tightly around my neck. I buried my face in her shoulder and let my hands tremble violently. I forced a hollow, confused look into my eyes, staring blankly at the perfectly manicured lawn. I let my jaw hang slightly slack. I murmured her name over and over, making my voice sound weak and lost, like a man who had no idea what year it was or how he had gotten outside. Trent rushed forward and placed a heavy, comforting hand on Chloe's back. He looked at the undercover agent with an expression of profound, manufactured relief. "Thank you, Officer Trent," said his voice dripping with fake emotion. We woke up this morning and his bed was empty. The window was wide open. His dementia has been getting so much worse lately, but he has never wandered off like this before. We were terrified. The undercover agent played his part perfectly. We found him wandering near the highway about 2 miles from here. He was disoriented and confused. "You need to keep a closer eye on him, sir. A man his age in that condition could easily step out into traffic." "I will," Trent promised, solemnly tightening his grip on Chloe's shoulder. "I absolutely will. We are looking into full-time care facilities today." Trent reached into the back seat and wrapped his arms around me to help me out of the car. To Chloe and the agent, it looked like the gentle embrace of a loving family member. But beneath the fabric of my pajamas, his fingers dug brutally into my bicep. His grip was a vice of pure, violent anger. He was furious that I had survived the night. He was furious that the police had found me before he could finish the job. I let out a pathetic whimper, leaning heavily against him as if my legs could not support my own weight. We walked slowly into the grand foyer of the house. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, echoing loudly in the silent mansion. Chloe was sobbing quietly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Trent turned to her with a soft, reassuring smile. "Honey, why do you not go upstairs and run a warm bath for him?" Trent said gently. "He is freezing cold and exhausted. Let me make him some hot tea and get his morning medication sorted out. I will bring him up to you in a few minutes." Chloe nodded gratefully, kissing my cheek one more time before hurrying up the grand staircase. The second she disappeared around the landing, the entire atmosphere in the foyer shifted. The warm, concerned son-in-law vanished completely, replaced by the cold, calculating predator I had watched through the attic floorboards just hours ago. Trent roughly grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the massive marble kitchen. He shoved me down into a heavy wooden dining chair. I slumped forward, letting my chin rest near my chest, maintaining the illusion of a broken, senile old man. Trent paced across the kitchen, muttering curses under his breath. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, clearly panicking that his master plan had been interrupted. "You stupid old fool," Trent hissed, pouring a glass of filtered water from the refrigerator. "You just had to go wandering off into the dark, did you not? You just had to make things complicated." He walked over to the kitchen island and pulled a small plastic vial from his pocket. It was not the organic vitamins he usually gave me. I watched him through the reflection of the stainless steel oven. He opened the vial and tapped a heavy dose of crushed white powder directly into the glass of water. He stirred it aggressively with a metal spoon, watching the lethal powder dissolve into the clear liquid. This was it, the lethal dose. He was not waiting for nightfall again. He wanted the $15 million trust fund today. What Trent did not know was that under the thick fabric of my oversized wool cardigan, I was wearing federal surveillance equipment. Tucked seamlessly into the second button of my sweater was a high-definition micro camera transmitting a live encrypted feed directly to Malik and his team, sitting in the mobile command center just 3 blocks away. Every curse, every crushed pill, every movement Trent made was being recorded and uploaded to federal servers. But Malik had prepared me for the most dangerous part of this operation. Trent was going to force me to drink the poison, and I had to make him believe he had succeeded. Strapped tightly to my inner forearm, hidden completely beneath the baggy sleeve of my cardigan, was a thick, highly absorbent medical-grade sponge wrapped in a waterproof plastic backing to protect my skin. Trent walked over and slammed the glass of water down onto the table right in front of me. His blue eyes were devoid of any human empathy. They were the eyes of a shark looking at a bleeding fish. "Drink this, Desmond," he commanded, his voice low and threatening. "It is your medicine. It will help your heart calm down. Drink every last drop." I slowly lifted my head, letting a string of saliva gather at the corner of my mouth. I looked at him with wide, vacant eyes. I let my hand shake violently as I reached for the glass. The heavy crystal clinked against my fingernails. "Chloe," I mumbled softly, slurring my words. "Where is my Beatrice? I want to go home." "You are home, old man," Trent sneered, leaning over me so close I could smell the expensive cologne on his neck. "Now drink the damn water before I force it down your throat." I picked up the glass with both trembling hands. I brought the rim of the glass to my lips. I closed my eyes and tilted my head back, opening my mouth, but I did not swallow a single drop. With practiced precision, I let the cold, bitter-tasting liquid flow out the side of my mouth directly down my chin and straight into the wide opening of my cardigan sleeve. The heavy medical sponge strapped to my forearm instantly absorbed the water, soaking it up like a desert drinking the rain. I made a loud gulping sound, crushing my throat muscles to simulate a deep swallow. I pulled the empty glass away from my face and set it down on the table with a clumsy thud. I coughed a few times, wiping my wet chin with the back of my hand. Trent stared at the empty glass. A slow, dark, and deeply satisfied smile spread across his handsome face. The tension left his shoulders entirely. He truly believed he had just successfully murdered his father-in-law. He believed he had won the game. "Good boy," Trent whispered, patting my shoulder with mock affection. "Now you just sit there and relax. In about 20 minutes, your chest is going to feel very tight. You are going to feel very sleepy, and then you are going to make me a very rich man." I slumped forward, resting my forehead on the cold wood of the dining table, letting my breathing slow down to a shallow, ragged rhythm. I closed my eyes and played the part of the dying victim perfectly. But beneath the table, my hands were curled into tight fists of pure iron. Trent thought he was waiting for my heart to stop beating. He had absolutely no idea that the federal trap had just slammed shut around his neck. The wire fraud was next. He was going to move the money today. And when he did, I was going to rise from this table not as a victim, but as the architect of his total and absolute destruction. I let my body go completely limp at the kitchen table. My breathing slowed to a shallow, ragged rattle. Trent did not call an ambulance. He did not check my pulse. He simply dragged my dead weight into a heavy medical wheelchair he had hidden in the garage. For the next hour, I sat slumped in the center of their opulent living room, staring blankly at the expensive Persian rug. The micro camera hidden in my cardigan button was capturing every second of his sick theater. The audio transmitter taped to my ribs was broadcasting live to my son Malik and his federal task force down the street. The doorbell rang just before noon. Trent rushed to open it, putting on his mask of deep, desperate concern. Walking through the door was the exact same man I had seen through the attic floorboards the night before. The man who had been holding a lethal injection in my bedroom. Today, he was not dressed like a midnight assassin. He was dressed in a pristine tailored suit, carrying an expensive leather medical bag, looking exactly like an elite private physician. Trent introduced him to my daughter as Dr. Aris, a highly recommended neurologist who specialized in rapid cognitive decline. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, her eyes red and swollen from crying all morning. She looked at the doctor with desperate hope, not knowing she was looking at a hired hitman. Dr. Aris approached my wheelchair with a sickeningly sweet smile. He knelt in front of me and shined a small pen light into my eyes. I kept my gaze totally vacant, staring straight through his head. I did not blink. I did not focus. He lifted my arm to check my reflexes, and I let it drop like a heavy bag of wet sand. He asked me basic questions. He asked me what my name was. He asked me if I knew what year it was. I responded with a confused, pathetic whimper, letting a single string of saliva roll down my chin. I whispered my late wife Beatrice's name, begging her to take me home to the old neighborhood. The performance was flawless, but inside my mind was a steel trap. I was recording every lie falling from this imposter lips. I was memorizing the sound of his voice for the day I would testify against him in federal court. Dr. Aris stood up and turned to Chloe with a rehearsed look of profound medical sympathy. He told her that the sudden wandering last night, the loss of motor function, and the complete cognitive disconnect were catastrophic signs. He diagnosed me on the spot with late-stage rapid-onset Alzheimer's disease compounded by severe physical heart failure. He told my weeping daughter that I was no longer Desmond Holloway, the brilliant real estate developer who built an empire from nothing. He looked her right in the eyes and said I was an empty shell, entirely incapable of making decisions, taking care of myself, or managing my own affairs. Chloe broke down, sobbing into her hands. Her shoulders shook violently as the weight of the diagnosis crushed her. She kept repeating that I was perfectly fine just a few months ago. She begged the doctor to tell her how a strong man could deteriorate so incredibly fast. Trent sat down beside her on the sofa, wrapping his arm tightly around her shoulders. He pulled her close, burying her face in his chest. He played the role of the protective, loving husband perfectly. He kissed the top of her head and told her that dementia is a cruel, invisible thief that steals our loved ones away overnight. He told her they had to be strong for me now because I could no longer be strong for myself. Then Trent made his real move. He reached onto the glass coffee table and picked up a thick stack of legal documents. It was a petition for a permanent medical and financial conservatorship. It was a legal mechanism designed to strip a human being of every single right they possess. It would give Trent total and absolute control over my medical care, my living situation, and most importantly, my $15 million commercial trust fund. Trent placed a heavy gold pen in Chloe's trembling hand. He leaned in close to her ear, and his voice dripped with manufactured grief and psychological poison. He told her they had to do this right now. He pointed at the fake doctor and whispered that she heard the diagnosis herself. "Your father is a profound danger to himself, Chloe," he said softly. "If we do not take legal control right now, the state might step in and force him into a cold public facility. He could wander out into the street again tonight and get killed. I am doing this to protect him from himself We have to take over his assets to pay for his round-the-clock private care. It is the only way to keep him safe in our home. Sitting in that wheelchair, I let the tears flow freely down my wrinkled face. To the monsters in the room, it looked like the pathetic crying of a broken mind lost in the fog of dementia. But my tears were absolutely real. I was crying for my daughter. I was crying because I was watching a predator manipulate my little girl, using her genuine love for her father as a weapon against her. He was twisting her grief into a tool to steal my empire. Underneath the wool of my cardigan, my heart pounded with a cold, calculating fury. I wanted to stand up, rip that pen from her hand, and wrap my fingers around his arrogant neck. But the voice of my son Malik echoed in my mind. Let him pull his own trigger. Let him build his own federal cage. Dr. Aris pulled a folder from his bag and signed the bottom of the medical evaluation. He stamped it with a fraudulent official seal. That piece of paper was my official death sentence in the eyes of the state. With that signature, they had created a legal reality where my voice no longer mattered. Trent slid the conservatorship papers closer to Chloe, tapping the line where she needed to sign as my next of kin. He told her it was just a formality to let him handle the stressful financial burdens so she could just focus on loving her dad. Chloe hesitated. She looked at me sitting in the wheelchair, slumped and drooling. She wiped her nose and told Trent that I always hated the idea of losing my independence. She said I fought for every dollar I ever made, and it felt deeply wrong to take my name off my own life work. Trent tightened his grip on her shoulder, digging his fingers in just enough to assert physical control. He looked at her with cold, authoritative eyes. He told her that the man who built that empire was already gone. He pointed directly at my face and coldly stated that I was just a physical burden now. He told her that if she did not sign, she was essentially abandoning me to die. The emotional blackmail was too much for her fragile state to bear. Chloe wiped her eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, and pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of the ink on the document echoed in the quiet living room. She signed her name, transferring the power of my life directly into the hands of my would-be murderer. Trent looked up from the paper and his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. A sickening, triumphant smirk flashed across his face. He had the medical certification. He had the legal authority. He thought he had the entire $15 million fortune firmly in his grasp. He thought he had brilliantly outsmarted a foolish old man and a naive, vulnerable wife. But as he folded the documents into his leather briefcase, the micro camera on my chest recorded every single detail of his treason. Trent did not know that the conservatorship he just forced my daughter to sign was completely legally useless. He did not know that elite federal agents were watching this entire scene unfold on high-definition monitors down the street. And most importantly, he did not know that by dragging my daughter into his fraudulent scheme, he had just crossed a line that I would never, ever forgive. I was going to destroy him systematically and brutally. But first, I needed to find a way to speak with Chloe alone. I needed to test her. I needed to know exactly how much of this poison she was actually aware of before I burned this entire house to the ground. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone in the sprawling living room with my daughter. Trent had just escorted his hired hitman, who was pretending to be Dr. Aris, out to the driveway. I knew exactly what they were doing out there in the morning fog. Trent was handing over a thick envelope of my stolen cash to pay for the fake medical certificate that had just legally condemned me. Chloe sat on the very edge of the sofa next to my medical wheelchair. Her face was buried deep in her hands, and her shoulders trembled with quiet, exhausted sobs. She was mourning the loss of a father who was sitting right beside her. I needed to know if those tears were genuine. I needed to know if my little girl was a calculating architect of my demise, or just another oblivious brick in Trent's twisted foundation. I listened closely to the sounds outside. I could hear the faint, arrogant murmur of Trent's voice echoing through the thick bay windows. I had maybe 2 minutes before the predator returned to his den. I stopped rocking my head. I pulled my slumping shoulders back and sat up perfectly straight in the heavy wheelchair. I reached out and clamped my hand securely around Chloe's wrist. My grip was not the weak, trembling touch of a dying man slipping into dementia. It was the iron grip of a master builder. It was the exact same grip that had hauled steel and mixed concrete for 40 years on the sweltering streets of Atlanta. Chloe gasped loudly and her head snapped up. Her tear-filled eyes widened in absolute shock. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and sudden hope. You are hurting me. I stared directly into her eyes, dropping the vacant, drooling stare completely. My voice was low, sharp, and perfectly clear. Listen to me very carefully, Chloe. We do not have much time. I need you to answer my question right now without thinking. She froze completely. Her breath hitched in her throat. People who read about dementia online often believe in moments of sudden, miraculous clarity. Chloe truly thought she was witnessing one of those rare, fleeting windows where her real father temporarily broke through the suffocating fog of a diseased mind. "Oh my God, Dad, you remember me," she sobbed, leaning in heavily to hug my neck. I put my firm hand on her chest and pushed her back gently, but with absolute authority. "There is no time for crying," I commanded, keeping my voice to a harsh whisper. "Look at me. Look at this house, the mansion we are sitting in right now, the one I gave you the $2 million down payment for when you got married. Where is the deed, Chloe? Who holds the title to this property right now?" Severe confusion washed over her delicate face. She blinked rapidly, struggling to understand why her dying father was suddenly interrogating her about real estate deeds instead of telling her he loved her. "Dad, why are you asking about the house right now? You need to rest. You are very sick." I squeezed her wrist, a fraction tighter, grounding her to the reality of the moment. "Answer the question, Chloe. Have you signed anything regarding the deed to this house recently?" She swallowed hard, looking away from my piercing gaze. It was the exact same nervous physical tic she had as a teenager whenever she broke curfew and tried to lie to me. "Trent handles all of our finances, Dad. He is a professional wealth manager. He knows exactly what he is doing." I did not let her look away. "What did he have you sign, Chloe? Tell me right now before he walks back through that door." She started to cry again, but this time it was defensive and painfully naive. "He remortgaged the house, Dad. He took out a massive equity loan against the property a few months ago, but it is perfectly fine." He explained it all to me. He found an exclusive high-yield private equity investment overseas. He said the massive returns would secure our family forever. He said we needed the extra liquidity to pay for your round-the-clock medical care now that you are getting so sick. He did it for us, Dad. He did it to protect you. The words hung in the quiet air of the living room, heavy and utterly suffocating. He did it for us. The sheer magnitude of Trent's depravity hit me so hard I actually felt physically ill. My brilliant, beautiful daughter had been completely blinded by a charismatic, ruthless sociopath. She was not a co-conspirator in my murder. She was just another victim being systematically bled dry. Trent had not just stolen the $2 million from my retirement account to cover his shady tracks. He had secretly leveraged the very roof over his wife's head to pay off his dangerous underworld debts. He had maxed out every single cent of equity in this sprawling suburban mansion. I saw the entire horrifying endgame unfold perfectly in my mind. Trent never intended to stay married to Chloe. The moment he successfully transferred my $15 million commercial trust into his offshore shell accounts, he was going to vanish completely. He would board a first-class flight to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving my daughter waking up in an empty bed. When the smoke finally cleared, the banks would come knocking. They would foreclose on this estate. Chloe would be left with absolutely nothing. No husband, no father, no inheritance, and millions of dollars in fraudulent debt permanently attached to her name. He was going to throw my little girl out onto the street without a second thought. Any lingering shred of paternal hesitation inside me evaporated into nothingness in that exact instant. Up until this moment, a small, foolish part of me had wondered if Trent actually loved my daughter. I had wondered if his financial desperation had simply driven a deeply flawed man to do terrible things. But there was nothing remotely good about Trent Sterling. He was a parasite, a tapeworm wearing a custom Italian suit feeding relentlessly on the lifeblood of my family. The pain of watching my daughter blindly defend the man who was actively destroying her quickly morphed into a cold, bottomless cruelty within my soul. I did not just want to send Trent to prison anymore. Prison was too easy. I wanted to break him entirely. I wanted to strip away his extreme arrogance, humiliate him in front of the wealthy elite he worshipped, and watch his entire carefully constructed world burn to ash. I was going to ruin him so completely that his own name would become a curse word in this city. The heavy footsteps of Trent's expensive leather shoes echoed loudly on the marble tiles of the front porch. He was coming back inside. I released Chloe's wrist instantly. I slumped my shoulders forward, letting my chin fall heavily back down to my chest. I unfocused my eyes, staring blankly at the expensive floorboards, and let a soft, pathetic moan escape my lips. "Dad," Chloe whispered, frantically trying to grab my hand again. "Dad, come back. Please do not leave me again." The brass door handle clicked, and Trent strolled casually into the living room, whistling a cheerful, upbeat tune. He looked at Chloe, who was crying fresh, devastated tears over my sudden return to a catatonic state. He walked over and kissed the top of her head, his hand resting casually on the rubber grip of my wheelchair. "Do not cry, sweetheart," Trent said, his voice dripping with false, manufactured sympathy. "We have the legal paperwork now. I am going to take full control of everything today. I promise you I will handle all the heavy financial burdens from here on out. Your father is in very good hands." I sat there in the chair, drooling slightly, playing the part of the broken old fool perfectly. But underneath my oversized cardigan, the FBI micro camera was still rolling. My son Malik was listening to every single word from the mobile command center down the street. Trent thought he was staring at a dying, powerless man. He had no idea he was looking at the architect of his absolute destruction. I'd given him the rope, and now it was time to watch him hang himself. Trent grabbed the handles of my medical wheelchair with a rough, sudden jerk. He told Chloe to go upstairs to take a long, hot bath and leave the stressful financial paperwork to him. He played the supportive husband so perfectly that my daughter actually kissed his cheek and thanked him before disappearing up the grand staircase. The moment she was out of sight, Trent wheeled me down the long, echoing hallway and shoved my chair into his private home office. He kicked the heavy mahogany double doors shut and turned the deadbolt. The sharp metallic click of that lock was supposed to be the sound of my absolute doom. Trent thought he was locking me in a cage. He had no idea he was sealing himself inside a federal trap. The office was a disgusting monument to his fragile, massive ego. It was filled with leather-bound books he had never read, imported antique furniture bought entirely on credit, and a massive glass desk that took up half the room. He parked my wheelchair violently in front of that desk, locking the wheels so I could not move. The fake sympathy, the gentle son-in-law routine, it all vanished instantly. In the privacy of this locked room, the real Trent Sterling finally took off his mask. He walked around the desk and opened a sleek leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and spread them out across the glass surface. I recognized the official bank letterhead immediately. It was the master transfer authorization for my primary commercial real estate trust, $15 million in prime Atlanta properties and liquid cash. The empire I had built from nothing, bleeding and sweating in the Georgia sun, was reduced to a stack of papers on a con artist's desk. Trent leaned over the desk, resting his hands on the armrests of my wheelchair, effectively trapping me. He looked down at me with a level of disgust and racial contempt that he had carefully hidden for years. "Look at you, Trent," whispered, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. 40 years of breaking your back. 40 years of playing the humble, hard-working man, hoarding all that wealth, building your little empire, and for what? To end up a drooling, pathetic mess trapped in my house. He picked up a heavy, solid gold pen and tapped it rhythmically against the glass. "You never really liked me, did you, Desmond? You always looked at me like I was just some slick white boy trying to spend your money. You thought you were so much smarter than me just because you hauled concrete and I wore suits. Well, you were right about one thing, old man. I am going to spend your money. I am going to spend every single dime of it, and I am not going to lose a second of sleep over it." He shoved the transfer document right under my nose. Next to it, he placed a small black ink pad. "The fake doctor's certificate is great," Trent sneered, walking around to stand directly behind me. "But offshore bank managers are notoriously annoying. They like to see a fresh signature and a thumbprint for large, irrevocable transfers. It makes them feel secure. It makes the transaction bulletproof." He grabbed my right hand with brutal force. I let my arm go completely limp, offering no resistance. I forced a weak, terrifying whimper from my throat. I let my breathing turn shallow and erratic. I let a fresh, warm tear roll down my wrinkled cheek, playing the part of a terrified, confused old man who had no earthly idea what was happening. Trent forcefully pressed my thumb deep into the dark ink. Then he jammed my hand down onto the bottom of the thick paper. The dark smudge of my fingerprint marked the document permanently. Then he picked up the gold pen and shoved it into my trembling fingers. "Sign it," Desmond Trent commanded, his voice dropping into a harsh, vicious growl. "Just write your name on the dotted line." Do it right now, or I swear to God, I will make sure the public facility I dump you in tomorrow is the worst, most abusive hellhole in this entire state. They will strap you to a bed and let you rot in the dark. I let my hand shake violently. The gold pen felt heavy and cold. The metal nib scratched aggressively against the thick premium paper. I slowly and deliberately formed the letters of my name. Desmond Holloway. The signature was shaky, jagged, and uneven. It was the exact handwriting of an elderly man rapidly losing his motor functions under extreme psychological duress. But it was mathematically and legally my authentic signature. I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered loudly against the glass desk. I slumped my head forward, burying my chin into my chest, and let out a soft, broken sob. Trent snatched the document off the desk, holding it up to the overhead light. A massive, greedy smirk spread across his face. His blue eyes lit up with the manic, unhinged joy of a predator who had finally made his kill. He traced his finger over my shaky signature and laughed aloud. It was a cold, heartless sound. He had it. He had the ultimate key to $15 million. He believed he had just legally stolen my entire life. But as he stood there gloating, admiring the piece of paper that he believed would fund his luxurious escape, my heart beat with a steady, rhythmic calmness. The micro camera, hidden flawlessly in the second button of my wool cardigan, recorded his triumphant, smiling face in perfect high definition. He was smiling at a document that was actually his federal death warrant. What my arrogant son-in-law did not know, what his narcissistic brain could never have possibly anticipated, was exactly what had happened at 4 a.m. in that subterranean FBI safe house. Before my son Malik put me in that police cruiser to bring me back to this mansion, we had a very private, heavily encrypted video call with my personal estate attorney. My lawyer is a ruthless, brilliant man who has guarded my corporate assets against corporate sharks for 20 years. Together in the dead of night, we had executed a highly classified legal maneuver known in extreme financial circles as a poison pill. We legally and permanently invalidated my signature moving forward. We registered a sworn, federally witnessed affidavit stating that any document, any transfer, or any authorization bearing the signature or fingerprint of Desmond Holloway executed after 4 o'clock that morning was to be immediately flagged as an act of criminal duress. But Malik and my lawyer did not just set up a simple block. They rigged the entire banking infrastructure. The moment that specific forged document was scanned and submitted to the trust management bank, it would not just decline the transfer. It would trigger a silent, unbreachable, absolute freeze on all assets connected to the requester. Every single bank account, credit line, and shell corporation tied to Trent Sterling would instantly lock down. And far more devastatingly, it would automatically generate an active, high-priority federal bank fraud alert directly to the United States Department of the Treasury and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Trent thought he had just forced me to hand over my empire. He had absolutely no idea that I had just legally weaponized my own name. That shaky, terrified signature he was holding so proudly was not a transfer of wealth. It was a digital landmine packing enough federal explosive power to put him behind bars for the rest of his natural life. And Trent was about to step right on it with a massive, arrogant smile on his face. I sat in the medical wheelchair, keeping my head bowed, hiding the cold, predatory satisfaction burning in my eyes. I listened to him hum a cheerful tune as he walked over to his high-speed scanner. Go ahead, Trent, I thought to myself. The silence in the room filled only by the mechanical whirring of his machine. Scan the paper, send it to the bank, try to take the money you think you have stolen. I am not just going to watch your entire world burn to the ground. I am the one handing you the matches. The mechanical whirring of the high-speed scanner was the only sound in the suffocatingly silent office. Trent stood over the machine, his eyes glued to the glowing green progress bar as it digitized the document I had just signed. He was practically vibrating with nervous, greedy energy. He pulled the thick premium paper from the feeder and held it up to the light one last time, admiring my shaky, terrified signature as if it were a priceless work of art. To him it was. It was his golden ticket out of the massive hole of debt he had dug for himself. He casually tossed the original document into a heavy steel safe behind his desk and sat down in his high-backed leather executive chair. He cracked his knuckles, a sickeningly arrogant gesture, and woke up his massive dual-monitor computer setup. The screens cast a cold blue light across his handsome, treacherous face. I remained slumped in my medical wheelchair, my head tilted downward, my jaw slapped. But I made sure to angle my chest perfectly toward the center of his desk. The micro camera, hidden flawlessly inside the second button of my wool cardigan, had a direct, unobstructed line of sight to his computer monitors. I let my breathing remain shallow and erratic, playing the part of the broken man perfectly, but internally, my focus was sharper than a razor. Trent navigated through a labyrinth of encrypted folders and secure banking portals. He was logging into the master control interface for my primary commercial real estate trust. This was the fortress I had built over 40 years, a financial stronghold holding $15 million in liquid cash and prime property assets. He typed in the administrative passwords he had secretly stolen from my private files weeks ago. He uploaded the fake medical certificate signed by his hired hitman. Then he uploaded the digital copy of the transfer authorization bearing my newly forged thumbprint and signature. He was so incredibly confident. He truly believed he was a financial mastermind executing the perfect crime. He began typing in the destination routing numbers. I watched the screen closely through my half-closed eyelids. He was not moving the money to a local bank. He was setting up a massive, irrevocable wire transfer to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. It was a classic, desperate move by a white-collar criminal trying to hide stolen funds behind the impenetrable wall of offshore banking secrecy. "Look at this, old man," Trent whispered to me, not even bothering to turn around. His eyes were completely locked on the glowing digits on his screen. $15 million. All those years you spent breathing in concrete dust, fighting with contractors in the sweltering heat, saving every penny while you drove that pathetic, rusty truck. And it takes me exactly 4 minutes of typing in an air-conditioned room to take it all away from you. You worked your entire life so I could retire on a private beach. He laughed. A cold, hollow, deeply evil sound that echoed off the mahogany walls of the office. He reached out and grabbed his solid gold mouse, moving the cursor to hover directly over the large, bright green button that read Submit Transfer. I kept my face perfectly blank, letting a slow string of saliva drip from the corner of my mouth onto my cardigan. But in my mind, I was smiling a dark, ruthless smile. Trent had absolutely no idea what was happening, just 3 blocks away. Hidden in the shadows of a quiet suburban cul-de-sac inside the heavily armored mobile command center of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, my son Malik was watching this exact same computer screen. Malik and his elite team of cyber crimes agents were receiving the live encrypted video feed from the camera on my chest. They were capturing every single keystroke. They were logging the offshore routing numbers. They were recording the high-definition audio of Trent loudly bragging about stealing my life savings. They were building an impenetrable fortress of federal evidence brick by digital brick. The trap we had set at 4 in the morning was designed for this exact microscopic moment in time. If Trent had just stolen cash from my wallet, it would be petty theft. If he had just forged my signature on a local real estate deed, it would be a state-level fraud charge. He could hire an expensive defense attorney post-bail and drag the trial out for years. He could manipulate my daughter and spin a web of lies to protect his reputation. But Trent was too greedy for local theft. His massive, fragile ego demanded that he move the entire $15 million fortune into an international shadow account. And that greed was his fatal flaw. The moment you use an electronic communication system, a phone, a computer, or a banking network to defraud someone and move stolen funds across state lines or international borders, the crime instantly changes. It crosses a massive legal threshold. It is no longer a local issue for the county police. It becomes federal wire fraud. It triggers the direct jurisdiction of the United States Department of Justice. Trent thought he was clicking a button to buy his freedom. He did not realize he was pulling the trigger on a federal felony. The sentencing guidelines for state fraud might have given him 5 years in a minimum security country club prison. But the moment he moved that money to the Cayman Islands, the federal penalty skyrocketed to 30 years in a maximum security penitentiary with absolutely zero chance of early parole. I watched him take a deep breath. He ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, savoring the moment of his ultimate victory. He looked at the screen, a look of pure, unadulterated worship in his blue eyes. "Goodbye, Desmond Trent," whispered softly. His index finger clicked down on the mouse. He hit the enter key. The computer screen loaded for a fraction of a second, and then a large green check mark appeared, followed by the words, "Transfer request submitted. Pending verification." Trent threw his hands up in the air and let out a loud, victorious cheer. He spun his leather chair around, stood up, and practically danced over to his private wet bar in the corner of the office. He grabbed a heavy crystal tumbler and poured himself 3 fingers of a ridiculously expensive scotch. He walked back over to my wheelchair, his face flushed with the adrenaline of a successful heist. He raised his glass in a mocking toast, holding it right in front of my face. "To you, Desmond Holloway. Thank you for your generous contribution to the Trent Sterling Early Retirement Fund. You can rot in a state facility now. I am done with you." He tilted his head back and swallowed the expensive liquor, savoring the burn. I sat perfectly still, letting him enjoy his drink. I let him enjoy his manufactured victory, because I knew the truth. I knew that the federal banking system had just caught his transfer request in midair. I knew that the poison pill my lawyer had installed was silently analyzing the forged signature he had just uploaded. I knew that Malik and his federal agents were high-fiving each other in the back of their surveillance van, having just secured the final indisputable piece of evidence needed to bury Trent forever. The trap had snapped completely shut. There was no going back. The crime was committed, documented, and federally sealed. Trent was officially a dead man walking. He just did not know it yet. But tonight, in front of the entire wealthy elite of Atlanta, I was going to tear his blindfold off. I was going to let him see the monster he truly was, right before I let the federal government drag him straight down to hell. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses sounded like shattering glass in my ears. Trent had rented out the grand ballroom of the absolute most exclusive country club in the heart of Atlanta. It was a place with towering marble pillars and gold leaf ceilings. A place where 40 years ago, a black man like me would not have been allowed to walk through the front door unless I was carrying a silver tray of appetizers. Now the room was filled with the city elite. State politicians, private equity billionaires, and old money aristocrats dripping in expensive diamonds. And right in the middle of it all was my son-in-law playing the role of the century. I was parked in the darkest corner of the massive room, shoved into a heavy medical wheelchair like a forgotten piece of luggage. Trent had forced my daughter to dress me in a stiff, oversized tuxedo that swallowed my frame, making me look infinitely more fragile and pathetic than I actually was. He had combed my hair flat against my scalp and draped a thick checkered blanket over my knees. I was the perfect tragic prop for his grand performance. A dying, senile king brought out for one last public viewing before being locked away in the dungeon forever. Through my half-closed eyes, I watched Trent work the room. He was a master charlatan. He shook hands with powerful senators, kissed the cheeks of wealthy socialites, and laughed loudly with investment bankers. He moved with the overwhelming, arrogant confidence of a man who firmly believed he had just successfully stolen $15 million. He thought the money was sitting safely in a Cayman Islands shadow account waiting to fund his new luxurious life. He was using my blood, my sweat, and my legacy to buy himself a prestigious seat at the table of the ultra-rich. Across the room, my beautiful daughter Chloe was holding a glass of sparkling water, looking absolutely exhausted. She was wearing a simple black evening gown, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Every time a guest approached her to offer their fake condolences about my rapidly declining health, she forced a tragic, heartbroken smile. Trent had convinced her that tonight was a necessary charity gala to honor my legacy before I was transferred to a high-security memory care facility first thing tomorrow morning. He told her it was a beautiful public way to say goodbye to the man I used to be. My chest ached violently, watching her blindly trust the monster who was actively destroying her life. The string quartet in the corner finished playing a soft classical piece, and the ambient noise of wealthy chatter filled the vaulted ceiling. Trent excused himself from a group of prominent local real estate developers and made a beeline straight for my dark corner. He carried a crystal flute of expensive champagne. As he approached, his warm, charismatic smile melted away completely, replaced instantly by the cold, dead eyes of a ruthless predator. He stopped right in front of my wheelchair, turning his body to block me from the view of the other guests. He leaned down, resting his hand heavily on my shoulder. His fingers dug sharply into my collarbone, a subtle, violent reminder of his physical control over me. He brought his face so close to mine I could smell the alcohol and expensive mints on his breath. "Sit still, old man. Trent whispered, his voice a low, venomous hiss that only I could hear. "Enjoy the music. This is the absolute last time you will ever see the inside of a room like this. Tomorrow morning, you are going into a locked ward with padded walls, and I am going to be the king of this city. You spent your whole life scraping for pennies in the dirt, but your money is going to look so much better being spent by me." I let my head loll to the side, letting my jaw hang slack. I forced a blank, vacant stare past his shoulder, completely ignoring his words, as if my broken brain could not process human speech. But beneath the lapel of my tuxedo jacket, my heart was beating with a steady, lethal rhythm. The FBI micro camera secured to my chest was capturing the arrogant, disgusting smirk on his face. The hidden microphone taped to my ribs was recording every single syllable he just whispered. I did not blink. I did not react. I simply absorbed his extreme arrogance, letting his massive ego inflate to the absolute breaking point. Trent patted my cheek twice, a deeply degrading and humiliating gesture, before standing up straight and adjusting his silk tie. He turned his back to me and walked confidently toward the center stage at the front of the ballroom. A waiter handed him a microphone. Trent tapped the steel mesh, sending a sharp, echoing thud through the massive speakers. The room immediately fell silent. Hundreds of the most powerful people in Atlanta turned their undivided attention to the handsome, sharply dressed white man standing under the brilliant crystal chandelier. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Trent began, his voice echoing with manufactured warmth and deep fake humility. "We are gathered here to celebrate not just the future of commercial investment in this great city, but to honor the past. As many of you know, my brilliant father-in-law, Desmond Holloway, has recently fallen victim to a catastrophic and aggressive form of cognitive decline." Trent paused, perfectly looking down at the polished floor, as if struggling to contain his immense grief. A collective murmur of sympathetic sighs rippled through the wealthy crowd. "It has been a devastating week for our family." Trent continued, looking over at Chloe, who was silently weeping into a napkin. But Desmond was a builder. He was a visionary, and he would not want us to stop building just because his own mind has failed him. That is why tonight I am incredibly proud to announce the official launch of the Sterling Legacy Fund. He gestured expansively with his hands, projecting pure authority. A massive exclusive private equity portfolio backed by $15 million in initial capital. We are going to reshape the skyline of Atlanta, and we are going to do it in Desmond honor. Tomorrow morning, Desmond will be transferred to a specialized medical facility to receive the round-the-clock care his tragic condition now requires. But his wealth, his legacy will live on through me and through this incredible new venture. The crowd erupted into thunderous, polite applause. Wealthy investors raised their champagne glasses in a unified toast to the brilliant new king of Atlanta real estate. Trent stood on the stage, soaking in the sheer adoration, completely intoxicated by his own perceived genius. He had done it. He believed he had successfully stolen my entire empire, committed me to a mental prison, and convinced the entire city that he was a selfless savior. He felt utterly invincible. Sitting in my wheelchair in the shadows, I slowly closed my eyes. The trap was now fully set. The bait had been swallowed whole. Trent had just publicly confessed to launching an investment fund with money that the federal government knew was stolen. He had just tied his entire public reputation to a massive international wire fraud scheme in front of a room full of state politicians and billionaires. He was standing on a pedestal made of gasoline, holding a lit match. I felt a sharp vibration in my tuxedo pocket. It was a single encrypted text message from Malik, waiting in the tactical command center just outside the country club gates. The message was simple. The money is frozen. The perimeter is secure. We are ready when you are. I opened my eyes. The fog of the fake dementia vanished from my vision entirely. The trembling in my hands stopped. The time for silence, the time for playing the weak, dying victim was officially over. The predator on the stage thought he had successfully buried a week-old sheep. He was about to find out he had just locked himself in a cage with a starving lion. I felt a sharp, distinct double vibration against my thigh. Reaching slowly into the silk-lined pocket of my oversized tuxedo pants, I pulled out my phone. The screen was dimmed to its absolute lowest setting, barely emitting a glow in the dark corner where my wheelchair had been discarded. A single encrypted message waited for me. It was from my son Malik. The text read, "Tactical teams are in position. SWAT has secured all 6 exits of the country club. The Cayman Islands transfer was intercepted and completely frozen the exact second it hit international servers. We are holding on your signal, Dad." I read those words twice. A deep, anchoring peace washed over my soul, settling into my bones like heavy iron. The $15 million was safe. My son was waiting just beyond those heavy oak doors with a small army of heavily armed federal agents. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The digital chessboard was firmly locked. Checkmate was already a mathematical guarantee. Now it was just a matter of letting the arrogant king embarrass himself completely before I knocked him off the table for good. The grand ballroom was a blinding sea of shimmering evening gowns and bespoke tailored tuxedos. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive vintage champagne, and the intoxicating, suffocating perfume of generational wealth. These were the absolute power players of Atlanta, investment bankers, state politicians, and real estate tycoons. They were the very same type of people who 40 years ago would have never looked my way when I was a young black man pouring concrete for their high rises in the sweltering heat. Now they were staring at my white son-in-law hanging onto his every single word as if he were a divine prophet delivering a sermon from the mountaintop. Trent gripped the edges of the polished mahogany podium. The stage spotlight hit his face perfectly, highlighting his sharp jawline and the serious, mournful expression he had clearly been practicing in the mirror for weeks. He leaned into the microphone. His voice resonated through the massive speakers. It was a master class in emotional manipulation. He told the breathless crowd that caring for an aging parent is a heavy burden no one is ever truly prepared to carry. He used the word burden with a subtle, heavy sigh that was designed to sound courageous. He painted a vivid, agonizing picture of his supposed daily struggles. He talked about the sleepless nights, the endless medical appointments, and the heartbreaking daily reality of watching a once strong, independent black patriarch regress into a state of total mental darkness. He spoke about me as if I were a tragic charity project. He told the audience that when he married my daughter Chloe, he did not just take a beautiful wife, he took on the massive responsibility of an entire family legacy. He actually paused his speech, letting his voice crack just a fraction of an inch to sell the illusion. He said it takes a very special kind of strength to watch a man you deeply respect lose his mind. He told them he had to step up to take the reins of my empire because I simply could no longer comprehend the basic world around me. He looked out at the sea of wealthy, privileged faces and told them that his immense sacrifice was born of pure, unconditional love. He painted himself as the noble savior stepping in to rescue the failing black businessman from his own decaying brain. Across the room, I watched my daughter Chloe bury her face in her hands. Her delicate shoulders shook with genuine, agonizing grief. She believed every single word falling from her husband's poisonous lips. She thought he was honoring me. She thought he was bravely carrying our family through an unprecedented medical crisis. The sight of her tears did not make me sad. It forged my anger into absolute, unbreakable steel. Trent was not just stealing my money. He was farming my daughter trauma for public sympathy. He was using her immense pain as a stepping stone to elevate his own social status among the elite. He was selling our family tragedy to buy himself a seat at the table of billionaires. Trent reached into the breast pocket of his custom suit and pulled out a crisp, white handkerchief. He dabbed delicately at the corners of his eyes. Crocodile tears, manufactured drops of water from a man who did not possess a single solitary shred of human empathy. He looked directly at the dark corner where my wheelchair was parked. The stage spotlight immediately followed his gaze, cutting through the darkness and illuminating my slumped, pathetic posture for the entire ballroom to see. A collective murmur of pity rippled through the wealthy crowd. They looked at me with sad, condescending eyes, seeing exactly what Trent wanted them to see. An empty shell of a man. Trent raised his crystal champagne flute toward me. He dedicated the official launch of his fraudulent $15 million investment fund to my memory. He spoke into the microphone, his voice ringing with absolute triumph. Desmond Holloway may not know who we are tonight. He may not understand the magnitude of what we are building in this room. But I promise you all, I will carry his legacy forward. I will manage his wealth with the exact same ruthless precision he used to build it. Tonight, we do not mourn the mind he lost. We celebrate the empire he left in my capable hands. The response from the crowd was deafening. The entire ballroom rose to their feet in a massive synchronized wave. It was a standing ovation for the heroic self-sacrificing son-in-law. Rich men nodded in solemn, profound respect. Wealthy women wiped tears from their perfectly powdered cheeks, clapping until their hands hurt. The thunderous applause echoed off the vaulted gold-leaf ceilings. Trent stood on the center of the stage, soaking in the absolute blind adoration. He closed his eyes, tilting his head back slightly, drinking in the applause, like a starving man drinking from a river. He felt like a god among men. He truly believed he had successfully orchestrated the greatest financial heist in the history of the city, all while being applauded as a living saint. I sat in the medical wheelchair, surrounded by the noise of clapping hands and cheering voices. The silence inside my own mind was absolute. It was the terrifying heavy stillness right before a Category 5 hurricane rips the roof off a house. The trap was completely full. The audience was captive. The confession was painfully public. Trent had pushed all of his chips to the absolute center of the table. He had built his golden pedestal as high as it could possibly go. All that was left for me to do was kick the marble pillar out from underneath his feet. I slowly placed my hands on the rubber armrests of the wheelchair. I uncrossed my stiff legs and planted my leather dress shoes firmly on the polished marble floor. I took a deep, slow breath, filling my lungs with the cold air of the ballroom. The time for playing the victim had expired. The performance was over. The storm was here. The thunderous applause was still echoing off the gold leaf ceilings. Hundreds of the wealthiest people in Atlanta were on their feet clapping for a man who had just plotted my murder. They thought they were witnessing a beautiful passing of the torch. They thought they were looking at a tragic, broken old man in the corner. I gripped the rubber armrests of the medical wheelchair. The heavy checkered blanket was still draped over my knees. I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp air of the ballroom. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second and mentally buried the weak, drooling old fool Trent thought I was. That character was officially dead. The real Desmond Holloway was ready to reclaim his empire. I pushed down on the armrests. My muscles ached from playing stiff and paralyzed all day, but the pure molten rage burning in my veins pushed the pain aside entirely. I planted my polished leather shoes firmly on the cold marble floor, and then slowly and deliberately I stood up. The heavy checkered blanket slid off my lap and pooled on the floor around the wheels of the chair. I did not stumble. I did not shake. I straightened my spine, pulling my shoulders back until I stood at my full height. For the past 3 months, I had been hunched over, making myself look frail and small. But tonight, standing in the shadows of that ballroom, I was the exact same towering figure who had commanded construction sites and ruthlessly negotiated multi-million-dollar deals for 4 decades. I reached up with steady hands and adjusted the lapels of my oversized tuxedo. I smoothed back my hair and set my jaw into stone. The transition was not magical. It was just a man putting his armor back on. The people standing closest to my dark corner were the first to notice. A wealthy real estate developer and his wife, who had just been looking at me with profound pity, suddenly stopped clapping. The woman gasped lightly, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. The developer took a physical step backward, his eyes widening in absolute shock. The disruption rippled outward like a rock thrown into a perfectly still pond. The people next to them stopped clapping to see what they were staring at. Then the next table stopped. Then the next. The thunderous standing ovation began to falter, dying out in jagged, uneven chunks. Within 10 seconds, the roaring applause deteriorated into a confused, disjointed smattering of claps. 5 seconds after that, the entire grand ballroom fell into an absolute suffocating silence. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. All eyes shifted from the glowing stage to the dark corner in the back of the room. The sea of politicians, billionaires, and socialites parted instinctively. They stepped aside, forming a wide, clear path that led directly from my discarded wheelchair all the way up to the mahogany podium. On the stage, Trent was frozen. His hands were still raised in mid-clap, accepting the adulation of the crowd. The smug, triumphant smile that had been plastered across his handsome face was violently erased. His jaw literally dropped. He stared at me, standing tall and perfectly rigid at the back of the room. His blue eyes bulged with a level of pure, unadulterated terror I'd never seen in a human being before. His brain was violently short-circuiting, trying to process an impossible reality. The man he had legally condemned as a late-stage dementia patient, the man he had drugged and abused and pushed to the brink of death, was standing under his own power, looking back at him with the cold, dead eyes of an executioner. Across the room, I heard the sharp sound of shattering glass. My daughter, Chloe, had dropped her crystal water glass. It smashed into pieces over the expensive Persian rug. She was staring at me, her hands trembling violently. She had spent the entire morning weeping over my catatonic body, believing my mind was gone forever. Now she was looking at her father, the strong, unyielding patriarch who had raised her. I did not look at her yet. I could not let the emotion of seeing my daughter break my focus. My eyes were locked entirely on the white predator standing on the stage. I took my first step forward. My leather shoe echoed loudly against the marble. Then another step. I walked with the slow, heavy, and absolute authority of a man who owned the ground he walked on. I did not rush. I wanted Trent to feel every single second of my approach. I wanted the suffocating pressure of his impending doom to crush his chest. As I walked down the center aisle, the wealthy elite of Atlanta shrunk back from me. I saw the faces of men I had done business with decades ago, men who knew exactly how ruthless Desmond Holloway could be when backed into a corner. The same people who had just been pitying me now looked at me with deep, visceral fear. The energy radiating from my body was pure, uncontained menace. I was not a sick old man. I was a highly dangerous individual whose territory had been violated, and I was here to exact a ruthless toll. I reached the base of the stage. Trent was practically hyperventilating. His chest heaved and sweat began to bead instantly on his forehead, ruining his perfect appearance. He took a stumbling step backward, away from the podium, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the wood. He opened his mouth to speak, to call for security, to say absolutely anything to maintain his fragile illusion, but no sound came out. His vocal cords were completely paralyzed by panic. I walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage. Each step felt like a drumbeat of justice. I stepped into the bright, harsh spotlight, standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who had planned to murder me. The height difference was suddenly very apparent. Trent was a tall man, but his cowardice made him shrink, while my righteous fury made me tower over him. I looked down at his soft, manicured hands, hands that had never built a single thing in their life, trying to steal an empire built by blood and sweat. I did not hit him. I did not scream. Physical violence would have been a mercy compared to what I was about to do. I reached out with a perfectly steady hand and snatched the microphone directly out of his trembling fingers. He let it go without a single ounce of resistance. His eyes darted around the silent ballroom, desperately searching for an exit, a friendly face, or a sudden miracle to save him. There was nothing. He was completely and utterly trapped on the very pedestal he had built for his own glorification. I turned to face the crowd of billionaires and politicians. The silence in the room was so thick it felt heavy on my skin. They were waiting, holding their breath, terrified and fascinated by the impossible resurrection happening right before their eyes. I brought the microphone to my mouth. My voice was deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of any weakness. It boomed through the massive speakers, bouncing off the gold leaf ceilings and hitting Trent like a physical blow.
Trent, my precious son-in-law. I began my tone dripping with a dark, mocking elegance. Your acting deserves an Oscar. You spun a beautiful narrative for these fine people tonight. You told them you were a noble savior taking on the heavy burden of my empire because my mind had failed me. You told them you were launching a legacy fund to honor my name. It was a brilliant, touching story. I turned slowly to face Trent. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. He looked like a man tied to the tracks, watching a freight train barrel toward him. But you forgot to check one thing. I whispered into the microphone, the sound echoing like a death knell in the massive room. You forgot to make sure the lion was actually dead before you tried to steal his kingdom. I held the microphone loosely in my hand, feeling the solid weight of the cold metal. The absolute silence in the grand ballroom was intoxicating.
Hundreds of the wealthiest, most powerful people in Atlanta were staring at me, completely paralyzed by the impossible scene unfolding before them. They had spent the last hour mourning my mind, clapping for my supposed successor, and pitying my tragic decline. Now they were holding their breath, waiting for the dead man to speak. I turned my attention away from my terrified son-in-law for a brief moment, and looked directly out into the sea of tailored tuxedos and diamond necklaces. Ladies and gentlemen of the Atlanta elite, I began my voice steady, deep and echoing flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. My son-in-law here just gave a highly emotional presentation. He told you a heartbreaking story about my failing health. He asked you to open your portfolios and invest your millions into his brand new venture, the Sterling Legacy Fund. He promised you incredible returns. He sold you a beautiful, compelling vision of generational wealth. I took a slow, deliberate step around the mahogany podium, forcing Trent to physically turn his fragile, shaking body just to keep me in his line of sight. He looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the executioner measure the rope. But before you hand over a single dime to this man, I continued pacing slowly under the harsh stage spotlight. I think it is only fair that you perform your due diligence. You are the smartest investors in the Southeast. You know that you must always look beneath the surface, because the man standing next to me is not a wealth manager. He is a financial illusion. He is a desperate, drowning parasite wearing a custom Italian suit that he cannot even afford. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. I saw highly respected investment bankers lean forward in their chairs. I saw state senators exchanging shocked, confused glances. Trent opened his mouth, raising a trembling hand toward the microphone, as if he were going to try and stop me, but a single sharp glare from my eyes froze him entirely in his tracks. He was physically incapable of moving. "Trent just invited you to join his exclusive fund," I said, my voice rising in volume, commanding the entire room. "He wants to manage your wealth." But I wonder, did he mention to any of you that he is completely and utterly bankrupt? Did he happen to disclose that he secretly remortgaged the beautiful home I bought for my daughter, draining every last cent of equity just to pay off his massive illicit debts to underground lenders? The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, shifting rapidly from confusion to sheer unadulterated disgust. The wealthy elite of this city tolerate many things, but they do not tolerate bad debt, and they absolutely despise being conned by someone pretending to be one of them. You see, Trent thought he had successfully orchestrated the perfect crime today, I explained, turning my body to face him directly. He brought a fake doctor into my home. He forced my grieving daughter to sign a fraudulent conservatorship. And then he locked me in his office, shoved a pen into my hand, and violently forced me to sign a master transfer authorization. He thought he was stealing my $15 million commercial real estate trust. Trent staggered backward, his highly polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the smooth stage floor. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly translucent shade of gray. The massive, arrogant ego that had fueled him for years was currently being crushed under the weight of his own exposure. He was completely naked in front of the exact people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. "But here is the most entertaining part of Trent's brilliant master plan," I said, letting a cold, dark smile spread across my face. Trent was in such a desperate rush to steal my money, he did not realize that I have lawyers who are much, much smarter than he is. He did not know that my legal team and I had already embedded a poison pill into my financial infrastructure. I took another step toward him, lowering my voice to a dangerous, penetrating tone that still echoed clearly through the microphone. "You thought you were so incredibly smart this afternoon, Trent. You sat in your expensive leather chair, you logged into my accounts, and you initiated an irrevocable wire transfer. You thought you sent $15 million of my hard-earned money to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. You actually toasted me with an expensive glass of scotch. Do you remember that?" Trent was hyperventilating now. His chest heaved violently beneath his tailored shirt. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he could not look away from me. He was completely captivated by his own destruction. "What you did not know, Trent, is that your international transfer never made it to the Caribbean," I announced, my voice booming like thunder across the silent ballroom. "The moment you hit the enter button on your keyboard, you triggered a federal trap. That $15 million did not go to your shadow account. It was instantly intercepted and diverted straight into a secure, monitored holding account operated by the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence in the ballroom shattered instantly. It was replaced by a wave of absolute chaos. Guests began whispering frantically to each other. Several prominent businessmen who had been shaking Trent's hand just 20 minutes earlier physically backed away from the stage as if Trent were suddenly infected with a deadly contagious disease. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those words were poison in a room full of millionaires, and that poison pill did not just stop your little theft, Trent. I continued, completely merciless. It triggered an automatic, immediate lockdown of every single financial asset attached to your name. You stood up here and asked these people for money. But the absolute truth is, as of 10 minutes ago, every single credit card in your designer wallet has been permanently declined. You cannot even afford to pay for the champagne these good people are drinking right now. Trent shook his head rapidly from side to side, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. No, he whispered, his voice cracking completely, forgetting that he was not speaking into a microphone. No, that is a lie. That is impossible. I checked the routing numbers. The transfer was approved. Then, check your phone. Trent. I challenged him, stepping to the side and gesturing toward his pocket with my free hand. Go ahead. You are a modern wealth manager. Check your banking apps right now. Show the crowd how wealthy you are. His hands were shaking so violently that it took him 3 attempts just to reach into his own pocket. The entire ballroom watched in breathless, morbid fascination. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, holding their trays perfectly still. My daughter Chloe was standing near the front tables now, her hands covering her mouth, watching the man she thought she loved unravel completely before her eyes. Trent pulled his sleek, expensive smartphone from his pocket. He fumbled with the screen, his sweaty thumb struggling to unlock the device. He opened his primary banking application. I watched his face closely. I wanted to see the exact microscopic moment when his entire world collapsed into dust. It happened in an instant. The bright glow of the phone screen illuminated his terrified features. He stared at the digital display, his eyes darting frantically back and forth across the glass. His mouth opened in a silent scream of pure absolute horror. Because what he saw was not the millions he thought he had stolen. He did not even see the meager remaining funds he used to pay his daily expenses. Every single account, his checking, his savings, his fraudulent corporate portfolios displayed the exact same number. A massive, terrifying string of zeros. And right below those zeros, flashing in a harsh, unforgiving red font that could not be ignored, was a single devastating banner notification. Account frozen by federal order. The phone slipped from his slick, sweaty fingers. It hit the wooden stage floor with a sharp, heavy crack, the glass screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken pieces. Trent Sterling, the slick, arrogant predator who thought he could murder a black man and steal his empire, fell to his knees right there on the stage. The strength completely left his legs. He collapsed under the crushing, suffocating weight of his own greed, sobbing uncontrollably in front of the hundreds of people he had tried to manipulate. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely no pity. I had given him 40 years of my life to respect, and he had chosen to try and end it. You should have checked the attic. Trent, I whispered, stepping over his broken phone. Because the man you thought you were hunting has been watching you the entire time. Trent stared at the shattered glass of his phone scattered across the wooden stage. For 3 agonizing seconds, his brain completely refused to accept the reality of his total financial destruction. He was cornered and stripped bare in front of the very people he worshipped. So, like any cornered animal, he lashed out with a blind and feral desperation. He scrambled to his feet, his custom-tailored suit wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled. He pointed a trembling, sweaty finger directly at my face. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He told the crowd not to listen to a single word I was saying. He shouted that I was completely insane, and that my dementia had finally caused a severe psychotic break. He begged the room to believe that this was all just a paranoid delusion of a sick and dying man who had lost his grip on reality. He turned frantically toward the back of the ballroom, waving his arms wildly in the air. He screamed for security. He ordered them to grab me and throw me out into the street. He demanded they sedate me before I ruined his entire charity event. He was literally gasping for air, pleading for someone or anyone to remove the madman from his precious stage. I did not move a single muscle. I did not flinch or defend myself. I just looked at him with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. I knew exactly who was coming through those doors, and I knew it was absolutely not the Country Club Ballet. The heavy, intricately carved oak doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom did not just open, they were violently shoved apart. The loud, concussive boom echoed across the marble floors, silencing Trent and his pathetic screaming instantly. But it was not the men in white dinner jackets coming to escort me away. It was a dark and overwhelming wave of tactical gear. A highly coordinated squad of armed federal agents flooded into the opulent room. They moved with terrifying and absolute precision, fanning out across the perimeter and securing every single exit in a matter of seconds. The wealthy elite of Atlanta, the billionaires, and the politicians who thought they were untouchable collectively backed away. They pressed themselves against the gold leaf walls in absolute stunned silence. Women clutched their pearl necklaces and men dropped their champagne glasses. Walking directly down the center aisle, parting the sea of high society like Moses parting the Red Sea, was my youngest son. Malik was not wearing a tuxedo tonight. He was wearing his federal windbreaker with the bold yellow letters of the FBI stark against the dark fabric. His face was a mask of pure, unyielding professional authority, but I could see the fierce protective fire of a sun burning right behind his eyes. Malik marched straight up to the stage. He did not even look at the terrified crowd. He kept his eyes locked entirely on the sweating, shaking predator who had married his sister. Malik stopped right at the edge of the stage, pulled out his federal badge, and held it high above his head for the entire ballroom to see. Trent Sterling, my son, announced, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of the United States government. You are under arrest. Trent stumbled backward, shaking his head frantically from side to side. He stammered, trying to say it was a massive misunderstanding. He cried out that it was just a simple family dispute over a private trust fund, and that the federal government had no jurisdiction here. Malik did not let him finish his pathetic string of lies. He read the charges loud and clear so every investor in the room could hear exactly who they had been dealing with. He announced that Trent was being indicted for federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and the forgery of medical and legal documents. Trent looked like all the blood had been violently drained from his body. He looked like a walking corpse. But Malik was not done. He took a heavy step up onto the stage, his voice dropping into a deadly, penetrating register. And Malik added his tone, ringing with absolute finality, "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit the first-degree murder of Desmond Holloway." The word murder dropped into the center of the ballroom like a live grenade. A chorus of horrified gasps erupted from the elite crowd. Trent fell to his knees again, holding his hands up in a desperate pleading gesture. He cried out that it was a disgusting lie. He swore that I was making it all up because I hated him and that he would never, ever try to hurt me. He looked out at the crowd, begging them to remember his noble savior routine from just 10 minutes ago. I looked down at him, utterly disgusted by his profound cowardice. I turned to Malik and gave him a slow, subtle nod. It was time to deliver the final killing blow to Trent's reputation. Malik reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small digital interface device. He walked over and plugged it directly into the main soundboard sitting at the base of the stage. He tapped a single button. Suddenly, the elegant classical music that had been softly playing in the background was cut off completely. It was replaced by a grainy, raw audio recording echoing loudly through the massive overhead speakers. It was the recording from my bedroom last night. The entire ballroom held their collective breath as the sound of Trent's own arrogant voice filled the room. The audio was crystal clear and completely undeniable. The crowd heard the hired hitman asking where the old man was, and then they heard Trent respond. They heard his cruel, venomous voice telling the fake doctor not to panic. The speakers boomed with Trent's exact words. Just inject it into his vein. Tomorrow morning, the paramedics will just see a 73-year-old black man who had a massive, tragic heart attack in his sleep. His heart is already failing anyway. The recording continued playing his sickening plans for the forged will and the $15 million. They heard the pure, calculated evil in his tone as he treated a human life like a simple accounting error waiting to be erased. As the recording echoed off the high ceilings, the reaction from the elite crowd was immediate and highly visceral. The very same men and women who had just given Trent a standing ovation now looked at him as if he were covered in a highly contagious flesh-eating disease. They physically recoiled in mass. Wealthy socialites covered their mouths in genuine physical horror. Powerful investors and state politicians turned their backs in utter revulsion, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the monster on the stage. Trent was completely and totally isolated. He was no longer the charming wealth manager of the elite. He was an exposed, pathetic murderer surrounded by a sea of absolute disgust. He curled into himself on the hard wooden floor, weeping uncontrollably and burying his face in his hands. He could no longer look at the glamorous world he had tried so desperately to conquer, because that world was now looking at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated hatred. My second son called me at midnight. He works for the FBI. His voice was a harsh whisper. "Dad, get out of your bed right now. Hide in the attic immediately. turn your phone on silent, lock the trapdoor, and do not make a sound." I whispered back that he was scaring me. He practically growled through the receiver. "Just do it. Do not let Trent know you are awake." I obeyed. Minutes later, looking through a crack in the attic floorboards down into my bedroom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Before I tell you how a 73-year-old man had to outsmart his own family to stay alive, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed is the quickest way to ruin a family. The audio recording faded into a suffocating silence. The absolute reality of Trent Sterling had been broadcast to every billionaire and politician in the room. His carefully crafted mask of the wealthy, educated savior had melted away, completely revealing the pathetic, desperate thief underneath. He was kneeling on the hard wooden floor of the stage, his expensive custom suit wrinkled and stained with his own terrified sweat. He looked out at the crowd, but there was no salvation there. The elite society he had worshipped his entire life was looking back at him with absolute disgust. So he turned to his last remaining lifeline. He turned to the woman who had been systematically manipulating and lying to for years. He turned to my daughter. Chloe was standing near the front row of tables. The devastating grief that had consumed her all morning was entirely gone. The tears had stopped falling from her eyes. She was staring at the man she had married, and I could see the exact microscopic moment her heart hardened into absolute stone. Trent scrambled to the very edge of the stage. He was practically crawling on his hands and knees, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his dignity. He reached his shaking hands out toward her, leaning over the edge of the podium. His face was a mask of pure manufactured agony. "Chloe, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "Please, you have to listen to me. You have to understand why I did this. I did not want to hurt your father. I swear to God I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was just so desperate." I stood perfectly still on the stage, looking down at him. I could have signaled my son Malik to drag him away right then and there. I could have ended his pathetic speech with a single nod, but I held my ground. I knew that I could not fight this particular battle for my daughter. I had protected Chloe her entire life. I had bought her that massive house. I had shielded her from the ugly, brutal realities of the world. But my protection had accidentally blinded her to the monsters hiding in plain sight. If I stepped in now, she would forever remain a victim of his manipulation. She needed to break this chain herself. She needed to be the one to swing the axe. Trent continued to weep, spilling his pathetic excuses into the silent ballroom. He told her about the offshore lenders. He told her about the massive investments that had failed. He blamed the shifting real estate market. He blamed the economy. He blamed the intense, unyielding pressure of trying to live up to the massive legacy of Desmond Holloway. "I did it all for us." Baby Trent cried out, thick tears rolling down his pale cheeks. "The men I owed money to were incredibly dangerous. They threatened to take everything we had. They threatened to take the house. They threatened to come after you. I was terrified, Chloe. I only took the money from the retirement fund to keep you safe. And the trust fund, I only wanted to transfer it so we could start over somewhere new, somewhere far away from all this pressure. I did all of this to protect our future. I did it for you. It was the ultimate sociopathic manipulation. Even backed into a federal corner facing 30 years in a maximum security prison, he was still trying to gaslight his wife. He was trying to make himself the tragic hero of his own murder plot. Chloe stood perfectly still, listening to his desperate lies. She looked down at his shaking hands, reaching out for her. Then she slowly lifted her head and looked directly at me. We locked eyes across the short distance. She saw the absolute calm in my posture. She saw the unwavering strength of a father who had survived the worst the world had to offer and had come back from the dead to protect his own. I did not nod. I did not speak. I just watched her. Chloe took a deep breath. Her shoulders squared and her spine straightened. She took a slow, deliberate step toward the stage. Then another. She walked with a terrifying, quiet grace that reminded me so much of her late mother, Beatrice. She stopped right at the edge of the stage, looking down at the crawling, weeping man who had promised to love and protect her. Trent let out a massive sigh of relief, thinking his emotional blackmail had actually worked. He reached out to grab her hands, but Chloe swiftly pulled them back, crossing her arms over her chest. "You mortgaged the home my father bought for us," Chloe said. Her voice was not loud, but the sheer coldness of her tone cut through the silent ballroom like a freshly sharpened razor. "You forged legal documents. You hired a fake doctor to drug my father in my own house. You stood beside me and held my hand while I cried over his failing mind, knowing you were the one poisoning him. Trent shook his head violently. Chloe, please, you do not understand the pressure I was under. I had no other choice. We were going to lose everything. You were going to lose everything, Chloe corrected him, her voice rising with a sudden fierce power. You gambled away your firm. You stole my father money to cover your own failures. And when that was not enough, you decided his life was a fair price to pay for your massive, fragile ego. You were going to steal $15 million, flee to the Cayman Islands, and leave me here completely alone to deal with the banks and the federal investigators. You were going to throw me to the wolves. Trent opened his mouth to deny it, to spin another desperate lie, but he was completely out of ammunition. The truth was standing right in front of him, and it was absolutely crushing him. Chloe slowly raised her left hand. She looked down at the massive, glittering diamond engagement ring and the platinum wedding band on her finger. The jewelry he had probably purchased using funds stolen from my accounts. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she grabbed the rings and violently twisted them off her finger. She looked down at Trent, her eyes burning with a righteous, absolute fury.
You did not do this for me, she stated, her voice ringing with finality. You did not do this for our future. You did it because of the bottomless greed of an absolute scumbag. She threw the heavy diamond rings directly at his face. The metal struck him hard in the cheek before clattering loudly onto the wooden stage floor. Trent flinched, burying his face in his hands, sobbing loudly and uncontrollably. Chloe did not look at him for another second. She turned her back on her husband and walked over to my side. I reached out and wrapped my arms securely around her shoulder, pulling her close. She leaned into my strength, resting her head against my chest. The little girl who had been blinded by a monster was gone forever. The strong, independent woman she was always meant to be had just been born in the fires of this ultimate betrayal. Malik stepped forward. He did not say another word to Trent. There was no need for any more dialogue. Malik grabbed Trent roughly by the collar of his expensive ruined suit and hauled him forcefully to his feet. Trent offered zero resistance. He was completely broken, utterly defeated by the total collapse of his grand illusion. Malik spun him around and slammed him face first against the polished mahogany podium. He kicked Trent legs apart and grabbed his arms, twisting them sharply behind his back. The heavy metallic ratcheting sound of federal handcuffs snapping tightly around Trent's wrists echoed through the silent ballroom. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard in my entire life. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable justice. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open again. Two more heavily armed federal agents marched into the room. Sandwiched between them, his head hung low in absolute shame, was the man who had pretended to be Dr. Eris. The hired hitman was already wearing handcuffs, his expensive medical bag confiscated as federal evidence. Malik's team had tracked him down and arrested him before he could even spend a single dollar of the blood money Trent had paid him. The entire conspiracy had been surgically and completely dismantled. The federal net had captured every single rat hiding in the walls of my family. Malik handed Trent off to two tactical agents. They grabbed him by the arms and began to drag him down the center aisle of the ballroom. The wealthy elite of Atlanta, the people Trent had desperately tried to impress, parted instantly to let the disgraced criminal pass. No one offered a word of sympathy. No one looked at him with anything but sheer absolute revulsion. Trent Sterling was completely erased from civilized society. I stood on the stage with my arm around my daughter and my son standing proudly by my side. I watched the heavy oak doors close behind the federal agents, taking the garbage out of my life forever. The storm had finally passed, and the foundation of my empire remained absolutely unshaken. 3 months passed since the night the federal agents dragged Trent Sterling out of that grand ballroom. The swift, brutal gears of the United States justice system had completely consumed his life. I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta on a crisp Tuesday morning wearing a charcoal gray tailored suit. My son Malik walked on my right side, and my daughter Chloe walked on my left. Her head was held high. The fragile, weeping girl from the mansion was gone, completely replaced by a strong, resilient woman who had spent the last 90 days taking her entire life back. The courtroom was vast and intimidating, filled with
polished oak, heavy mahogany benches and the suffocating silence of absolute authority. The gallery was packed with reporters, local politicians, and members of the public who had followed the dramatic collapse of the fake wealth manager. I took my seat in the front row and looked across the aisle at the defense table. Trent looked completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, slick predator who wore custom Italian suits and drank $200 scotch was entirely gone. He was wearing an oversized, bright orange prison jumpsuit. His perfectly styled hair was thinning and unkempt. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and sallow from spending 23 hours a day in a federal holding cell. He looked small, pathetic, and deeply terrified. He refused to look in our direction, keeping his eyes glued strictly to the wooden table in front of it. His high-priced defense attorney, an aggressive man famous for getting white-collar criminals reduced sentences, stood up to address the jury. The defense strategy was incredibly predictable, but deeply offensive. The lawyer paced in front of the jury box, weaving a pathetic tale of a young, ambitious man who was simply crushed under the impossible expectations of his wealthy, domineering father-in-law. The lawyer tried to paint Trent as a victim of extreme psychological pressure. He argued that Trent was drowning in a shifting economy, completely overwhelmed by the massive financial shadow cast by the great Desmond Holloway. He told the jury that the attempted murder and the forged documents were not the calculated actions of a cold-blooded killer, but the desperate, spontaneous mistakes of a young husband suffering from a severe mental breakdown. He claimed it was a crime of blind panic driven by the pure terror of failing his family. I sat there listening to this highly paid lawyer try to turn a calculated assassination into a tragic mental health crisis. I felt no anger. I felt only a cold, absolute clarity. It was time to permanently dismantle this pathetic illusion. The federal prosecutor called my name. I stood up and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy wooden gate swung open and I stepped up into the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. I looked directly at the 12 men and women sitting in the jury box. Then I slowly turned my head and locked my eyes completely on Trent. He physically flinched, sinking lower into his wooden chair. The defense attorney immediately went on the attack, trying to rattle me. He walked up to the witness stand and asked me if it was true that I was a demanding, intimidating man. He asked if I had constantly made Trent feel inadequate because he did not earn as much money as I did. He tried to corner me into looking like a tyrant who drove a weak man to madness. I leaned forward toward the microphone. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal authority that echoed perfectly through the silent courtroom. I gave that man a $2 million home completely paid for, I stated, my eyes fixed coldly on the defense lawyer. I gave him a daughter who loved him with her entire heart. I welcomed him into my family and trusted him to sit at my table. I never asked him for a single dime. I only asked him to be a good husband. The defense lawyer swallowed hard but tried to push forward. But surely, Mr. Holloway, you must admit that the intense pressure of your business legacy caused Trent to act erratically out of sheer financial desperation. I let out a slow, dark chuckle that sent a chill through the room. I looked directly at the jury, making sure every single person in the box felt the absolute weight of my words. Financial desperation makes a man miss a mortgage payment, I replied, my voice sharp as broken glass. Stress makes a man take out a bad loan or lie on a credit card application. But stress does not make a man spend 3 months secretly crushing lethal heart medication into an old man morning tea. Stress does not make a man hire a criminal hitman to pose as a neurologist in my own living room. Stress does not make a man violently grab my hand, dig my thumb into an ink pad, and force a dying man to forge a $15 million federal wire transfer. I paused, letting the horrific reality of those facts hang heavy in the sterile courtroom air. I pointed a steady finger directly at Trent. That man did not have a sudden mental breakdown. I continued, my voice rising with absolute, undeniable righteous fury. He executed a meticulously planned 90-day assassination protocol. He researched the exact drugs needed to mimic a natural heart attack. He paid $50,000 in stolen cash to a federal fugitive to create fake medical conservatorship papers. He looked my grieving daughter directly in the eyes, holding her hand, while he secretly planned to leave her completely bankrupt and homeless. That is not panic. That is pure, unadulterated evil. The courtroom was absolutely breathless. The defense attorney took a physical step backward, completely disarmed by the sheer brutal reality of my testimony. He had absolutely no counter-argument. He could not debate the high-definition micro-camera footage the prosecution had already played for the court. He could not debate the audio recording of Trent bragging about my failing heart. My testimony was simply the final devastating nail driven into the coffin of their pathetic psychological defense. The lawyer quietly thanked me and practically retreated to his seat. The prosecutor rested his case. The judge gave the jury their final instructions and dismissed them to the deliberation room. Federal trials of this magnitude involving massive financial fraud and attempted murder usually take juries several days to untangle. They have to review thousands of pages of banking records, wiretap transcripts, and complex medical testimonies. We sat in the wooden pews waiting for the long, agonizing process to begin. But we did not have to wait long. Exactly 40 minutes after the heavy doors of the deliberation room clicked shut, the bailiff stepped back out into the courtroom. He handed a single sheet of paper to the judge. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. 40 minutes. It was virtually unprecedented in a federal trial. The jury did not need days to debate the evidence. The truth was so brutally obvious that they had made their decision before the coffee in their break room even got cold. Trent was ordered to stand. He was shaking so violently that his defense attorney had to physically hold him up by his elbow. The foreman of the jury, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, stood up and read the verdict loud and clear. On the charge of federal wire fraud, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the charge of international money laundering, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit medical and legal forgery, guilty. And on the supreme charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, the jury finds the defendant guilty. Guilty on every single count. Trent's legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed heavily into his chair, burying his face in his shackled hands, sobbing loudly and uncontrollably. The pathetic wailing echoed through the massive courtroom, but there was not a single ounce of sympathy to be found anywhere. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I simply stood up from my wooden bench, buttoned my suit jacket, and placed my arm around my daughter's shoulders. Chloe looked at the broken, weeping man she used to call her husband, and she did not shed a single tear. Her eyes were completely dry, and her posture was solid rock. She had survived the fire, and she had come out stronger. We turned our backs on Trent Sterling and walked slowly down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors swung open, spilling bright natural sunlight into the dark federal building. The silent adjustment was officially complete. The predator had been permanently caged, and my family was finally free. 2 weeks after the guilty verdict, the federal court convened for the official sentencing phase. The courtroom felt different this time. The tense anticipation was gone, replaced by the cold, heavy certainty of impending justice. Trent stood before the federal judge wearing his bright orange jumpsuit and heavy iron shackles around his wrists and ankles. The chains rattled loudly in the quiet room, a harsh metallic reminder of his permanent new reality. The judge, a stern man with decades of experience, looked down from the bench with absolute disgust. He did not mince his words. He addressed Trent directly, calling his crimes a calculated, deeply cynical, and horrific exploitation of family trust and human vulnerability. The judge stated that attempting to murder a vulnerable elderly man to steal his life savings was a profound act of moral bankruptcy. Then the judge brought down his heavy wooden gavel. He sentenced Trent Sterling to 40 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He explicitly denied any possibility of early parole. Trent would be well into his 80s before he ever had a chance to breathe free air again, assuming he survived that long in a maximum security environment. Trent collapsed to his knees right there in the courtroom, weeping and begging for mercy that he did not deserve. But the most poetic and brutal justice came immediately after the sentencing. Trent belonged to an old aristocratic white family who prided themselves on their pristine public image. They had attended the hearing, sitting strictly in the back row. They did not come to support their son. They came to witness the burial of his reputation. As the federal marshals dragged Trent away, he looked desperately toward the gallery, screaming for his father to help him. His father simply stood up, turned his back, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. Trent was completely and utterly erased from his own bloodline. He was abandoned to the federal system entirely alone. With the criminal trial officially closed, the battlefield shifted from the courtroom back to the financial sector. The federal government released their temporary hold on my $15 million commercial real estate trust fund. Every single penny was meticulously accounted for and safely returned to my absolute control. But Trent had left behind a massive and highly toxic financial mess. He had secretly leveraged the sprawling suburban mansion I had bought for Chloe, completely draining the equity to pay off his underground gambling debts and fund his fake wealth management lifestyle. The holding bank was threatening immediate foreclosure. They were preparing to throw my daughter out onto the street. They did not care that her signature had been violently forged or that her husband was a convicted federal felon. Banks only care about the bottom line. But they forgot that I am a man who built his entire life mastering the bottom line. I did not let the bank terrorize my little girl for a single second. The following Monday, I walked into the local branch manager office accompanied by my fiercely protective estate attorney. The branch manager was a slick, arrogant man who had been harassing Chloe with daily eviction notices. He tried to give me a rehearsed corporate speech about liabilities and foreclosure protocols. I did not let him finish his sentence. I did not ask for a deadline extension. I did not ask for a payment plan or a grace period. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a certified cashier check directly on his polished wooden desk. I paid off the entire fraudulent multi-million-dollar mortgage in one single devastating stroke. The manager's jaw literally dropped as he stared at the string of zeros on the certified bank draft. I bought the house back in pure cash. Then I had my lawyer immediately rewrite the property deed, placing the estate into a secure, ironclad legal trust, solely under Chloe's name. No future husband, no business partner, and no outside investor could ever touch a single square inch of that property again. It was permanently and irreversibly hers. 3 weeks later, the dust had finally settled. The relentless chaos, the flashing lights of the federal agents, the endless meetings with lawyers, and the constant exhausting state of hypervigilance all faded away into a quiet and steady peace. I sat on the wide wrap-around porch of Chloe Mansion, relaxing in a heavy wooden rocking chair. The afternoon sun was warm and golden, filtering gently through the massive oak trees in the front yard. There were no fake doctors lurking in the hallways. There were no poisoned pills hidden in my morning tea. There was just the gentle, soothing sound of the wind rustling through the green leaves. Chloe walked out onto the porch, carrying 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. She was wearing a simple, comfortable sweater and a pair of faded blue jeans. She did not look like the stressed, manipulated trophy wife she had been forced to be for the past 3 years. The heavy layers of anxiety and manufactured perfection had completely melted off her face. She looked relaxed, deeply grounded, and incredibly strong. She handed me a warm mug and sat down in the rocking chair right next to mine. We sat in absolute silence for a long time, just watching a pair of red cardinals fly across the manicured green lawn. The silence between us was no longer heavy with unspoken secrets or hidden terrible fears. It was the comfortable, easy silence of 2 survivors who had walked through an absolute inferno and come out the other side completely intact. Chloe took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea and looked out at the long circular driveway. She told me in a quiet but firm voice that she was going back to work. Before she met Trent, she had been a brilliant architect managing massive commercial development projects. Trent had systematically convinced her to quit her job, telling her that the wife of a high-profile wealth manager needed to focus solely on hosting charity galas and attending elite country club luncheons. He had intentionally and maliciously stripped away her financial independence to make her completely reliant on his illusions of grandeur. But she was not going to be reliant on anyone ever again. She told me she had accepted a senior partnership at a top architectural firm in downtown Atlanta. She was going to design skyscrapers again. She was going to make her own money and build her own legacy. She looked over at me, her eyes shining with a deep, hard-earned wisdom. She said she finally understood the hardest and most painful lesson of all. She realized that real love should never cost a person their independence. She learned that a charming smile and an expensive custom suit can easily hide the dark, rotting soul of a complete monster. She promised me that she would never blindly trust someone with her life again without looking closely at their actions instead of listening to their pretty words. I listened to my beautiful daughter speak, and my heart swelled with an immense and profound pride. I had spent 40 years building a massive empire of concrete and steel, trying desperately to shield my children from the harsh, brutal realities of the world. I had thought that providing them with endless financial security would keep them safe from predators. But I was incredibly wrong. The only true security in this world is knowing exactly who you are and having the unshakable internal strength to stand on your own 2 feet when the people you trust try to cut you down. Chloe had finally found her armor. She had looked pure, concentrated evil right in the eye, and she had not blinked. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. My grip was strong and steady, completely devoid of the fake, terrified tremors I had forced myself to endure just months ago. I told her how incredibly proud I was of the woman she had become. The afternoon sun slowly dipped below the distant tree line, casting a warm, brilliant glow across the quiet estate. The monster had been permanently locked away in a dark concrete cage of his own making. The empire I built with my blood and sweat was absolutely secure, and my family, though scarred and brutally tested, was finally standing on solid, unshakable ground. The silent adjustment was officially complete. The storm was over and the future belonged entirely to us. I am 73 years old. In this world, people look at an old man with gray hair and a slow walk, and they see a victim. They see someone who has outlived his usefulness, someone who is fragile and waiting for the end. Trent looked at me and saw a heavy burden he could easily discard. He thought my silence was the silence of a failing mind. He thought my age made me compliant and weak. He was completely wrong. My silence was the calm center of a hurricane waiting to tear his world apart. Today I do not hide in the shadows of a suburban mansion. I stand tall in the bright Atlanta sun. I took a large portion of my commercial real estate wealth and I founded a charitable organization. We are dedicated to providing affordable housing for low-income families in the very same neighborhoods where I poured my first yards of concrete decades ago. I spend my days reviewing blueprints, talking with community leaders, and building futures for people who actually know the value of an honest, hard-earned dollar. I am no longer a forgotten old man. I am the architect of my own legacy, and I guard it with absolute authority. I sit on the wrap-around porch of the new home I bought for myself, overlooking the quiet Georgian landscape. I sip my black coffee and watch the sun rise. There is a profound peace in my chest now. A peace that comes from knowing the monster who slept under our roof is locked inside a concrete federal cell for the rest of his natural life. Trent thought he was a mastermind. He thought his youth and his white-collar arrogance gave him the ultimate advantage over a retired black engineer. But he forgot the golden rule of construction. You can build the most beautiful house in the world, but if the foundation is made of lies, it will inevitably collapse. I simply provided the earthquake. When I look at my family now, I see pure, unbreakable strength. Every Sunday, Chloe and Malik come over for dinner. We sit around a large oak table sharing food and talking about our weeks. We do not talk about Trent. His name has been completely erased from our vocabulary. He is a ghost, a distant nightmare that no longer has any power over our reality. I see my son Malik walking up my driveway wearing his dark federal windbreaker, his badge gleaming on his belt. He is a fierce protector of justice, and the bond we forged during that terrifying midnight rescue is something no one will ever break. And then I look at my beautiful daughter Chloe. She did not let Trent destroy her spirit. She took the pain, the betrayal, and the immense humiliation, and she used it as fuel. She is back at the drafting table designing massive skyscrapers that will redefine the skyline of this city. She laughs freely now, unburdened by the suffocating weight of a manipulative narcissist. She learned the hardest lesson of all, but she survived it and she came out forged in iron. The storm we went through washed away all the lies. It washed away the fake smiles, the poisonous greed, and the deadly illusions. What remains is only the solid, unshakable truth. I spent 40 years building a financial empire, but the greatest thing I ever built was the trap that saved my family. I learned that you can give your children the world, but you cannot protect them from the monsters who wear custom suits and speak with silver tongues. You can only give them the strength to stand up when the monster finally reveals its true face. Moral of the story: blood and marriage do not guarantee loyalty, actions do. In a world driven by greed, the most dangerous mistake a predator can make is assuming that silence means weakness and old age means compliance. True power is not about shouting your wealth or demanding respect. It is about holding your ground, observing the shadows, and striking only when the trap is perfectly set. Protect your heart, but always lock your vaults. You cannot control the dark intentions of others, but you absolutely control the consequences they face. Justice is not always handed to you. Sometimes you have to architect it yourself. Did you enjoy this story? What would you have done if you found out your own family was plotting against you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that true family is built on respect and loyalty, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful life stories. Thank you for watching, and remember to always protect your peace.